Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and this is the Breaking Free Show for sure. Hope you're all doing well and looking forward to today's show. And for the first time in days, I am seeing sun and wearing glasses, so I am excited. And I hope you're all doing well. Before we get started with our show, I just want to say hi to Amnon, who is always here and ready to go.
I'm ready to go. How are you?
I'm great.
You look like you're cold.
No, I just don't know what the weather's going to be.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. We don't know.
We're in North Carolina, and one day it's 30, the next it's 70.
Yep.
And you just don't know. So I'm prepared for whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You? Everything?
It'll be nice if it'll continue like this the whole summer.
Yeah, this is a beautiful day.
No, I mean, being cold and then warm.
Yeah, right. There's the summer. Yep. So anything going on? Anything you want to say?
No, everything cool? Everything is slow in the technology world.
Slow, except for the spam, the phone call spam.
That keeps going.
Oh my God, I've never gotten so many in my life. Anyway, please feel free. This is your open invitation anytime during our show. Please feel free to call in 919-518-9773, or you can come in on Skype, and that would be computers. That's plural. Then the number 2K voice. You will come in on Skype voice, not video, so don't worry about that. And we have a chat, a live chat. You're welcome to join us there. Put your name, nickname, whatever you like. It's under our window where the video is. You can comment. You can ask a question. We monitor it, and we would love to have you partake in our show today. So it's fun. And I have to be honest with you. I'm having so much fun with our guests that I almost forgot we were going live. If Amnon didn't start playing the music, I'd still be talking. So you're in for a treat. So let me introduce my guest to you today. His name is Doug Hammack. And he is called the Offbeat Minister. And don't you want to know what that's about? Welcome to our show.
Well, thank you.
Nice to have you.
Yeah.
He's got a really good radio, TV voice, I think. Don't you all think the same?
Well, I woke up with a little frog.
Oh, well, that's it, right? You're a natural.
Yeah.
So who is Doug Hammack?
So I am a minister at North Raleigh Community Church downtown.
In North Carolina.
Yep, here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We've been there I've been there 22 years. Actually came out from Los Angeles to start this community.
So you started the community?
I did.
Okay, good. So listen, wherever you are in the world, there's going to be information you're going to hear today that is for anybody, anywhere. Thank you. All right. So you started the community. Why?
I did.
Why?
Well, I came from one of the large mega churches. It's become kind of a phenomenon. And I was a little disillusioned with what I saw religion doing in people's lives, or more pointedly, what I saw it not doing in people's lives. People who had been active participants in the process, engaging in all the things, doing the good things, weren't seeing the kind of life transformation that I anticipated ought to be part of our religious/spiritual experience. And so when it was time for me to leave the church, I arrived here in North Carolina with kind of a sense of disorientation because it was a good church. It was not a bad church. You know, sometimes mega churches have a negative connotation. These were good people, devout people, sincere people doing the best that I knew was. And if that wasn't transforming people's lives, then maybe the problem wasn't with church. It was with the whole concept. So I arrived a little disoriented with what do we do? How do you start something like this?
What made you choose to come here?
North Carolina?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I had a few things that I was looking for. The way my brain is wired, I was looking for a place that had high education, education in the population. I was looking for a church that had a building and had no people, which is kind of weird because I knew we were going to start something, but I also knew I'm not particularly administrative. And when you start a church, the setup up and the taking down, that's just an enormous issue. So
you didn't want to build something like that.
I didn't want to do that. So, and we found it. We found a place that had a building, had no people, and we came here to start a church.
So what was missing? And let me ask you this question. So what you consider to be missing, is it still missing other than at your church or churches like yours?
Well, let me answer that in a roundabout way.
Okay.
So when we arrived, it was about the time two things happened. TiVo came out where you could pause television, and the television show Survivor came out. And we had little kids, so we'd gather around and we would watch this show, and then we would push the pause button, and I would say to the kids, okay, you see that behavior? Why don't we do that? Why don't we behave that way? And the thing that was striking to me was how often it was religious people, and particularly Christian people, and if they could find a minister, all the better, who behaved the worst. And I thought for a long time, well, you know, that's just good television. We're going to juxtapose a religious person and bad behavior. And then I started looking at the statistics in our society, and I started looking at what was happening in church, and I realized, no, we are just behaving badly, and that's the problem. And so I thought, well, okay, if we're going to start a church that's healthy, we're going to start dealing with the way we do church. But then I realized that the way we do church is rooted in a set of instincts, because our instincts inform our behaviors, and our behaviors inform what we do. Well, but our instincts are rooted in our core life meaning-making narrative. And so we've got a story about God that, you know, I don't know if you say this kind of stuff on your program.
You can say anything you want.
Our God's kind of an asshole, because here's what our God says.
The God okay.
The God of the conservative Christian tradition
Gotcha. So
says,
right.
I love you. However, if you don't shape up and fly right, beat the hell out of you, you know, send you off to eternal torment. And so we've got this idea inside that our God is a little bit hypocritical, and that our God is kind of mean-spirited. Now, we would never say that. We've got such a nice way of telling our story. We've got such a shiny veneer on the outside. But when you look under the veneer, it is really a harsh story. And so our God is a mean-spirited hypocrite. And if you look around at how Christians are behaving, we are mean-spirited hypocrites. And so we become like the God we worship, in a sense. So we look at, where do our instincts come from? They come from our core meaning-making narratives. And so that was kind of, when we arrived, what we stumbled onto. Oh, wow. It's not as easy as just fixing up the way we do church. We got to think about how we think about things.
So this is a big concept.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I want to go back a little bit.
All right, back up.
What was your life like when you were in the big church?
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel? Like, what was going on for you? How tormented were you, or how conflicted were you, or what was your life like back then before you made the decision to actually break free from what you had known, and what you were taught?
Well, to give a clear understanding of that, you have to go back some years before that. Before I went into ministry, I had a decade of depression in which my whole worldview was disorienting, unraveling, and so I had gone through this in advance, and I had a moment in which I came out of that. It happened on an afternoon, interestingly. I had an afternoon in which I came through that, and I didn't have a narrative to match my experience yet. That evolved over years. But during the years when I was at the church, I had this base orientation that was working for me. But my job there was to be the college minister. So I was dealing with kids 18 to 22, and then a little bit later, 25, 26, 27. So I was watching how their lives were not connecting to a religious tradition, were not connected to a religious narrative. And so my pain became the disconnect. They would come to the college group, but they wouldn't connect with the religious tradition that had been so meaningful in my life. So that's what started my rethinking. My pain was actually a vicarious pain on their behalf, because I had had meaningful, life-transforming experience within a religious context. This was not happening for them. And it was in Los Angeles, so LA is a little bit ahead of the curve in a national terms. So what was happening with them, actually, 5 years later, 10 years later, began to just kind of permeate the nation. And so my pain actually came from the disconnect between my belief about the possibilities within a religious tradition, and the experience of that not happening.
So some of the frustration, let me see if I understand it. For you, and with the 20 some odd year old college students, was, here you're teaching them all this stuff. They're showing up, but then there was a big part they weren't connecting with.
Yeah.
And that is a big frustration.
Yeah. And more than even whether they're connecting or not connecting, it's not changing their lives.
It's not changing their lives.
I mean, they're established in a religious tradition, so they're showing up and they're doing the things, and they come to the meetings and they listen, and they're wonderful kids, great kids, wonderful human beings. But what I was giving to them, what we were giving to them, wasn't an invitation into a transformative context.
Okay. Okay, so you go through your experience.
Yep.
You have that, and then what?
And then the the church invited me to go away.
What did you do that they invited you to go away?
I was writing
Can
a bunch
you?
of memos to the senior minister and to the board about we were missing this generation, and I was raising up a bunch of issues, and they
Okay.
said it was not in a mean-spirited way at
Right,
all.
right, right, right.
It was really just actually one of the things the senior minister said, you know, Doug, if you've written 10 things, 2 of those things we're going to do. A little slower than you'd like, but we're going to do. 2 of those things we're never going to do. And 6 of those things are going to take so long before we do this. He said, you should be in charge. And this place has got someone in charge. You need to go somewhere and be in charge. So
Okay.
that's how
All
I
right,
got
so
here.
that's how you got here.
Yeah,
Okay, so you come here, you find a building
Yep.
with no people.
that's right.
And so what did, and with this concept,
Yeah.
based on what you experienced in California with
Well,
these,
it wasn't a concept
uh,
yet. It was the absence of a concept.
it was
It was
absence of
we
a
can't
concept.
do that, and we can't do that, and we can't do that. I didn't know what to do. I just knew what we could not do.
Okay, so then what'd you do?
Well, so people started filtering in, and I just started talking about that. And I said, "We
What
got a
you can't
problem.
do.
Yeah, we got a problem, and I don't know what the problem is. Do you know what the problem is?" And so we a lot of us had been kind of chewed up and spit out by our religious experience, and we gathered together and we licked our wounds together, and we comforted one another, and we didn't do what most people do. Most people say, this is all hogwash. I'm out of here. It's not meaningful. We had meaningful experiences within the tradition, but we also had been beaten up by the tradition. And so we were asking questions about why and how and what does it mean. And so really what I say to folks who are just joining the community now, I said, for 10 years, we asked 2 questions. Can we still be Christian? And then the other question was, can we still do church? And so we worked a lot on that. And what that meant for us was getting below the behaviors to dismantling the instincts to going to the narrative. So how do we tell our story of God? How do we tell our story of human nature? How do we tell our story of sin? How do we tell our story of salvation? How do we tell our story about our sacred texts? How do we tell all these stories? And how have we been telling them? And how has that painted us into this little tiny corner? And how could we look at our history and our heritage to find a broader understanding? So we did a lot of that work for 10 years.
So tell me what some of the things that you spoke about in that transition
All
and
right.
telling the story. It's interesting because I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
My husband is not.
Yeah.
He is Catholic.
Mhm.
Parents, went to church every Sunday. His mother, went to church a lot of days during the week. I mean, very devout Christian, had mass at her house when she was dying, all that stuff. My husband has no interest in going to church.
Mhm.
He'd rather go with me to the synagogue. But when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that's the reason a lot of people leave the church.
It is.
Like people like my husband. That doesn't make sense. So I'm so anxious to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's a good thing we've got an hour because you're right, and we are going to get to talking about the sex book.
We're gonna talk. So just so you all know too, that Doug is an author and he's written 2 books,
Yeah.
right? Just tell everybody what they are right now.
One is Rethinking Our Story. The subtitle is Can We Still Be Christian in the Quantum Era? And the second one is Rethinking Sex Education. And the subtitle is The Wisdom of Religion Without the Crazy.
So we're going to talk about all of that too.
All right.
But we're going to build this story and then come to that. But I don't want to forget about those.
So I think what prepared me for this way of being a minister started way back when I was in high school. I loved the history classes. I actually got my undergraduate degree in history. My graduate degree is all focused in history. It's this sense of where we are in this historical moment. And if you understand the history of the Christian tradition, it is this vast spectrum. But what we've done since the 1100s, since the 1100s, and then after the Reformation in the 1500s, And then what happened in the Americanization of Christianity is we've narrowed down the idea of what it means to be Christian, and we've moved it slightly to the right. And we've said, this is the Christian tradition. And if you jump out of that, you still might be left of center, but you aren't Christian anymore, or you're not faithful to the tradition. So, but by exploring the breadth of the tradition and all the arguments that we've had over all the centuries that we've been doing this, and all the ways that we've worked to understand this ineffable reality that we would call the divine, or this deep reality that contains the word spiritual, we've had this vast spectrum of things. But usually the people who win the fights write the history. And so we all, I'll give you just one example. We all have an idea that came from Augustine of Hippo, who was 5th century bishop. And he said, here's the problem with human nature. We are all totally and completely sinful. There is nothing good within us. Now, the Genesis story says, here's what makes us us. The breath of God animates us and makes us alive. So we are carriers of the breath of God. Same word as spirit. We are carriers of the Spirit of God. But Augustine now, these 6,000 years, 3,000 years later, says, no, 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 that all goes away. And now, in order to shoehorn this into the Greco-Roman worldview, we're going to say it's all worthless and empty and nothing, and you're nothing but original sin. Now, so whatever you do, don't look within to find the divine. You must go without to find the divine. And so the whole trajectory of our tradition has to go outward for our spiritual life. We go outward to the priest, or outward to the bishop, or outward to the book, or outward to we go somewhere out there to the mountaintop to have an experience, as opposed to quieting ourselves and listening for the Spirit within, and listening for the still small voice. We organize our religion around an external divine as opposed to an internal divine. And when we look at our broad spectrum, we don't have to do that. How did we get shoehorned into this little tiny bit of this? We've taken the uncontainable divine. You know, in our Jewish heritage, we are taught not to even say the word God. We take all the consonants out. Certainly don't draw a picture of God or make a statue of God, because then you're trying to contain what cannot be contained. So we've contained it. And we've said, God is this way and not that way. God does this, doesn't do that. God likes this, doesn't like that. These are the people God likes. These are the people God doesn't like. And we've got it all figured out. And now we're stuck in that. And it's poisonous and it's toxic and it's killing us.
But no wonder people are having a spiritual, what do you call it? A problem.
Evacuation. They're leaving the place.
Well, they're not just leaving the place, but the way you said it,
mm-hmm.
and the fact that it's all happening outside of you.
Yeah.
I mean, no wonder people are feeling void and empty.
Yeah.
And have no and feeling sinful.
So if you look at the alternative to at least organized Christianity, it is spiritual but not religious. That's the fastest growing category of religious people. And what they're saying is, I can't be spiritual and religious because religion is actually toxic to spirituality. So therefore, I must make this choice between. And so what I tell folks who come to our community all the time is, when we are at our best, the religion is the house and spirituality lives inside. The problem is, if the house gets toxic, it gets rats, or it gets radon, or it gets black mold, we stay because the alternative is we got no house. So we stay and we stay and we stay and we huff and we puff. We can't breathe until, I got to leave. Thank God I'm free at last of that. But it never occurred to us that it's not going to be long. And, you know, it's nice to have a couch and it's nice to have a chair.
Yeah.
It's not, there's good stuff in organized. Organized is not the problem. The toxicity of our narrative is the problem. So I've said, in our generation, it happened 500 years ago. It happens throughout history from time to time. It's our job to strip the house down to the studs and rebuild it. As opposed to evacuating, leaving it, we could be restorative of our religious tradition. So that's what we've been working on for these 20 years.
Now bring me up to date, more up to date. What do you profess? What's your story? What do you, when you're doing a sermon, what are you talking about?
So, the premise of the first book was this: we are in one of these moments of seismic upheaval in Western society. We lived for a long, long time in the world defined by Newton and Copernicus, and that was the world is fixed, truth is fixed, everything is certain, everything is the way it should be, and that worked for us just swimmingly for 500 years. And then Einstein comes along and he says, well, no, truth is kind of relative to where you're standing when you experience it. Heisenberg says uncertainty isn't just to be eradicated. It is baked into the system. It's never going to go away. And all of a sudden, we've got a new reality. We've got a new universe. We've got a new world we live in. Well, our governing systems were rooted in that old worldview. So right now, people are questioning governance. Our economic systems, 50 years ago, we would have never questioned capitalism. Now, our millennials, they're all questioning capitalism. And we're certainly questioning our religious tradition because it was built on a worldview that lasted for 500 years, and then the worldview went away. And so how do you update governance, and how do you update all the systems that make a society, government and education and family and business and religion? And so how do you do that? So what we talk about, the reason these books start with the word rethinking, is because we have to do that. We have to go back and say, what does it mean to have an authentic, vibrant spiritual life when the world is not a fixed reality? The world is not immersed in certitude. We're not immersed in certitude. We live in a world of the unknowable and the unknown. How do we frame a religious experience that's vibrant and meaningful in that new world? And for us, it is how do we frame a Christian religious experience? And so that's kind of what we talk about in an abstract way.
Right.
It ends up, we talk about, so what do we think about this God notion? And what do we think about prayer? And what does it mean?
Yeah,
And
so give us some, like, what you would say. Like, what do you think about God, or what do you now believe?
well, let's just start with that.
That's a big subject.
Believe is how we have defined our religious experience. We define ourselves by our beliefs. So therefore, I believe the Christian beliefs, you believe the Jewish beliefs, therefore, I can't go to church with you. That construct is rooted in a concept about belief in general.
So that's an old construct.
Yeah. So if we say instead, our objective is to experience the movement of the uncontainable divine, then how are you in your Jewish tradition? How are you experiencing that? And how am I experiencing that in my Christian tradition? And how are we experiencing? Let's go have a talk with the Buddhists, and let's go see what other folks are. How are they experiencing this divine movement? Because the divine is big enough to contain all of these. It's not that we have the corner on God. So how do we go experience that?
So what part of Catholicism, Christianity are you holding to be true?
Yeah.
That you work with? What part are you is good, is right for you?
So in the first book, the Rethinking Our Story book, I organized the book around the table of contents of a systematic theology book. And that's a book that everybody that goes to seminary has to read somewhere along the way. And it always has the same table of contents. Introduction, why our theology is better than yours. Section 1, the doctrine of God. Section 2, the doctrine of human nature. Section 3, the doctrine of Jesus, the doctrine of Christ. Section 4, the doctrine of sin and salvation. And Section 5, the doctrine of the afterlife. And conclusion, once again, why our theology is better than yours. So what we did in the project is go through each one of those sections and say, within the breadth of our Christian tradition, are there other ways that we can think about those? So now on this side of that 10-year exercise, I would say that I would hold to the Christian notion of God and the Christian notion of Jesus and the Christian notion of, I would hold to all those notions. But that fundamental rethinking process has meant that what those words mean to me now and what they meant to me when I was growing up in the more conservative tradition are wildly divergent, and the differences are quite profound. Yeah, and then if I talked about that, that would take too long.
No, okay, give us. Well, you can give us
All right, so here's the thing.
Do go for it.
So I just
Well, before you do though, if
Yeah.
anybody has a question, feel free to call us 919-518-9773. A comment, a question, whatever you want. If you want to join the chat, please do. If you want to come in on Skype, computers, 2K voice, please do. Because I'm enjoying this to the max. So, I know you are out there enjoying it too, but if you have a comment, please. Okay.
So I'll give you an example of a lesson I did on Sunday.
Give me examples.
So on Sunday, I said, okay, that we as a community are doing this fundamental rethinking of our Christian narrative and being part of church. That we are part of a movement across the world that's doing that called the emergent church movement, that we are in that mix. We owe a debt of gratitude to this guy. And we went back to the 30s or 40s, and I put up a picture of this guy's name's Karl Rahner. And so Karl says, before Vatican II, he says, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not be a Christian at all. And so we always have discussion after the lessons. And so people were speaking up and whoa, mystic, that just means weird kind of paranormal stuff. And I said, no, mystic means something very specific. It means to have direct encounter with that which cannot be contained. And it is as a normal process as can be. And I use the illustration of those pictures, those computer generated dots that you used to stare at for a long time. You couldn't see anything until you changed your focal length. And then you would see there's an airplane or a rose or something. And I said, the problem has been our focal length. We are looking at God through this fixed focal length that says God is our Father who art in heaven and nothing else. But if we change the focal length, then what happens is we move into a way in which the experience, the firsthand encounter with the divine, is as normal as breathing. It is built into the fabric of everyday life.
All you got to do is listen.
Yeah, it is. You got to listen, but you got to listen with the right ears.
Well, that's listening.
Yeah, you got to have the right framework, and you're not editing out the things that are there that you just can't hear.
Right, then that's not listening.
Exactly. And so we look at, okay, so now let's go back into that same tradition that is our Christian heritage and say, how have we done that? Well, we've done that with communal practices, and we've done that with contemplative practices. We've done that with learning practices, and we've done that with serving practices. These are the ways that has happened. And sure enough, we've developed a whole bunch of communal practices, and you do experience the divine. Oh, that's what that means. Here's a bunch of contemplative practices. We restore meditation and centering prayers.
Oh, that's how it feels.
Yeah. So we did. Right. Oh, this is what we're talking about. And it becomes a normative part of our spiritual life to have mystical or direct encounter with the divine.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
And I know that there's an excitement, there's an enthusiasm, there's all of these things that you can experience that you can now experience that maybe you didn't experience with those those college students. Okay. It's exhausting too, isn't it? To keep holding is it exhausting? Let me ask you this: to hold the energy of that and still have the other going on?
Exhausting might not have been the word.
What's a good word?
Well,
I mean, is it frustrating?
So when I wrote the first book, I actually wrote it for the denomination that we were part of, because these people loved me and I loved them. But I knew that, like every other Christian denomination, young people were just, voting with their feet and they were leaving. And so we were not touching them. The same thing had been happening in that college group. I wrote this book and I used the traditional Christian scriptures and I used the traditional Christian doctrines. And I said, now look at our history, our spectrum. And I wrote this with them in mind to say, this is our way out of this problem we're having. And they didn't see it that way. Some did, but the people that were in the power structure directly above me did not. Mm-hmm. And so, at first, they used a strong word to describe me, and it was apostate. I didn't know what that means, but what apostate means is heretic plus passion. Then, after I wrote some defense papers and had some conversations, okay, we're going to lower it from apostate to just plain old heretic. And then I wrote some more papers, and they said, okay, we're going to lower that from heretic to just you're Christian, but you're not our kind of Christian. And I was going to keep writing, but to be honest, I just got exhausted, because you're right. It is exhausting. And so here's what I have said. I give people this book and I said, here's the experience of 10 years of us grappling with this issue. I bet it's not the right answer. I bet it's not the way. But here's what has to happen. At this moment in history, we are in the throes of a reformation.
It's the path.
We have to rethink. We do have to rethink it. This may not be the way to rethink it, but I am deadly committed to rethinking as a process.
Right, it's a path.
Yeah. And then there's some folks who are just really opposed to the whole idea that that's going to happen. And that's what I meant when we were talking before the show. We're in many ways, we're just waiting for some folks to die because a generation of people who are committed to certitude and a fixed version of truth, not in their religion, just in their, what has saturated their understanding of
Right.
reality, that generation has to go away so that another generation that comes in kind of weaned on, I say this all the time. A lot of kids don't understand Einstein's theory of relativity, but they've all seen the Planet of the Apes. And so they know that time morphs. And once you know time morphs, then maybe truth morphs. Maybe you morph and I morph, and maybe reality isn't the way they've absorbed the idea that reality isn't the way we were taught. And that's just in their DNA.
Right.
And so,
Well, they've seen they've seen what was considered reality.
yeah.
And not everybody wants that.
So the worldview shift, it's happened in the young people already. And in essence, the people who resist are in the other worldview, and it's a waiting game.
So is this
I pray to God we don't blow ourselves up before we get to that
no,
shift.
no, because it's kind of like it's like what I don't have any profound way of saying this.
Mm.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's the time has come to rethink things.
Yeah.
And to shift things. Period. I mean, there's no profound way of no glorious way of saying it is what it is.
Well, it really is a historical moment. It's the same thing that happened in the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, we updated the medieval worldview. And because we updated our medieval worldview, we had to update our governing systems. We moved from monarchy to democracy. We moved from feudalism to capitalism. We moved from the clan to the nuclear family. We moved from the Catholic papal authority church to the Protestant church. We had to update our systemic institutions to match the change in worldview. And that's what we're having to do right now.
And it's happening on many levels. And it's happening on many planes. It's happening in a lot of homes. People are talking about stuff.
Yeah.
I believe it. Otherwise, shows like mine, books like yours. I mean, there are a lot of people talking about rethinking a lot of things. In fact, I'm the founder of a networking organization for women as part of some of the things that I do. And I propose that we do a book for women, business leaders, owners, whatever. And I'm calling it Breaking Rules. I only want women who are doing things in business that are breaking rules and creating a new paradigm.
Yeah. And
it's a guide for success. But we can't go by the same old rules.
My son-in-law is an accountant. And he said to me, I explained some of this stuff to him about worldview shift and how we now live in a world in which paradox can actually be a truer true than certitude. And he was saying, it's crazy, but if you were ever to think of anything that ought to have a one and true way to do it, it would be accounting. But he said, when I was going through my graduate work in accounting, there's 9 ways to do accounting. And all of them are valid, but there's 9 ways to view this reality. And accounting, you would think that's spreadsheets and numbers, and it's a number at the bottom.
But they keep coming up with another law, right? Doesn't that change things? You think it's supposed to be one way, then they come up because of something else happened, and it's a new law, and it changes how you've been doing it. So a law just breaks the rules. So tell me, and again, and here's is there anything on the chat I need to address? Okay. So we're talking about a lot of things here. Okay. What is it?
Chris is saying, you want to get it?
Where is it? Let's see. There's okay. Chris, in his book, Doug writes, I knew I had to start telling the Christian story in a way the new world view could hear it. Is that what you're referring to in here? Okay. That's what Chris just said. One of the things we're that's next. So let's rethink sex education. Then maybe we'll just have to put it all together, or maybe we can't. See, that's the thing. When you're rebuilding, rethinking, relooking at things, you're dissecting, and that's the way you have to do it because it's so intrinsic in everything. So talk to me about rethinking sex education.
So this process trying to update our religious narrative to work in this new worldview, update how we practice church. It is strip it down to the studs work. And so consequently, it was a pretty all consuming. And ritual was one of the challenges because ritual is actually a deeply human thing. But the rituals that we practiced were rooted in the old worldview. And so the ritual actually
Oh
became
my gosh.
problematic.
You really had to you really have been dissecting.
Yeah. And so we started to look at all of our rituals of baptism, our rituals of salvation, our ritual, all
And
these.
how they, I mean, maybe baptism is one thing, but what's being said about it
Exactly.
is,
So it started when people would come to me and want to get married. And they would say, we don't want to have a traditional wedding. So I would strip the wedding ceremony down and I would say, well, here's the elemental parts. And then I would say, here's what the community's role is. That's what we call the charge. Here's what your role and your commitments to each other. That's the vow. Oh yeah, we want to do that. Yeah, we want to do that. They wanted all the elements that were part of this ancient practice that we do when we bond our lives one to another. They just didn't want the language that rooted in the worldview that they had already rejected and they could not articulate that. They just said, yeah, I don't want those words said.
So we're talking, and I'm not, so I don't know, but what I hear sometimes from people is the words like, it's the, let's say it's the man, it's the man in charge.
It can be
Is
the
that
gender
what,
stratification.
is
It
that,
can also
okay,
be the role that God has in a marriage or
okay,
how God and
oh,
spirituality and whatever it was,
okay,
they don't want any of it.
okay.
But then when we strip it all down and explain the component parts, sure enough, they want all the part, and they really want spirituality in there too. So they want that. They just don't want the worldview. Well, ritual was a problem. Well, the church is, I imagine it's true in the synagogue as well. There's a lot of ritual, and it's meaningful and it's important, but we couldn't do it. So we, parenthetically, we also couldn't do a lot of our songs. Our songs were problematic as well. But we couldn't do our rituals, and so we just left them. We didn't do any ritual in the church for almost 10 years.
None.
None, except for that wedding one.
Goodness gracious.
And so then we started to realize the lack. And so we went back and said, okay, now that we've kind of have this new narrative around our spiritual tradition, what rituals could we do? Let's go back and let's look at the birth ritual, which was for some Christians baptism, for others dedication. Let's look at that and say, what were they trying to do and what could we do within this worldview? And so we rewrote the birth ritual. And then there used to be surviving child mortality, a 5-year-old. Now we kind of tied it to go into school. So there was that ritual. And what do we do with that? What were they trying to do? Let's read through the Common Book of Prayer. Let's see what those things were. What were they trying to do, and how could we update? And then one of them was the puberty ritual. Or in the Jewish tradition, it's bar bat mitzvah. For us, it's confirmation.
Right.
What do you do when a child is emerging into that adult stage? And so we went through that, and we rewrote a ritual that matched our worldview, our spiritual tradition in that. When we got to that one, the folks that were doing the ritual writing came to me and said, all right, we cannot send our kids out into adulthood without addressing this issue of sexuality.
So can I ask you something?
Yeah.
You don't tell me who exactly,
Yeah.
but what kinds of people are involved in your church writing new rituals? Like, what do they look like? What are they made up of? I mean, really, what are
They're teachers. They love kids. They're psychologists who think about developmental growth and what's appropriate at times. They're history-based people who think about how does life evolve over periods of time. They're smart people, and then they're just people who love church and love the spiritual community. And so, most of our rituals are formalizing the pledges that we make one to another. So, young family with a young child, we are now going to say the words in a formal way that we are trying to live out together, which is, this is our promises to you. And this is your promises to us. This is what it means to be in this community. This is the promise we believe the spiritual tradition makes to you. And so it was a community effort. And, I had a part in it too.
amazing?
I did some of the wordsmithing, and then we've got a couple of people who do editing. And
It's amazing because it could take forever just to create a mission statement.
it took
Right?
us,
I mean, a vision
it took
statement.
us a year to write these things. And then it's taken about 3 years to kind of
Implement them?
institute them because we only do them once a year. So We're on like our 5th iteration of each one of those rituals now. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
so the one about puberty, we realized we can't do the puberty ritual without also having some kind of sex education component. And truth to be told, we don't know what to say. And so, because here's what Christian folks are taught. We only have one rule, that's sex rule, and it is don't have sex till you're married. That's our sex rule. And when we lived in an agrarian society, that was very effective because the time from sexual maturity until readiness to contribute to society was 3 or 4, maybe 5 years. And when we lived even in industrial societies, it was the same thing. But now we still hold on to the rule because it has such a cherished heritage. But now the time from sexual maturity, puberty happens earlier now, and marriage happens later because readiness to be contributors to society happens later. So now the average time is 15 years. So it takes 15 years at the time when we are at the height of our sexual energy. And our rule is, honey, just wait. Wait. If you've waited till the end of high school, great, fantastic. 70% haven't. But if you've waited till the end of high school, we just want you're going to send you off to college now. We're going to house you down the hall from one another, and we're going to unschedule your time. And then we're going to say, would you just wait 4 more years? Oh, thank you. You did a good job. Now, would you just wait 6 more years? And then we're ready. And so the kids who go off, so we've got kind of a thing that we do. And, we do these purity retreats where we go off and we make pledges that we're going to stay pure when we're young, and we get a ring, and we do these things. And the kids who do that, and the kids who believe that, and who believe that this is the best way and believe that that's God's way, if you look at the statistics, they're not doing it. But we're not saying that out loud. We're just not doing it.
And they drop out of church.
And now everybody feels that they are failures. I did something bad by being a sexual being, by having sexual urges and drives. Yeah.
Yes,
by
right.
doing this thing in this context, in this narrative, I have failed. I've failed my family. I failed those pledges that I made. I failed God. And so then we had one guy say, once you've broken one of the laws of God anyway, what the hell?
The big one.
Let's just unleash the 3-ring circus.
Right.
And now let's.
Right.
And so how do we do this in this context? And so I knew I was going to write this book before we got kicked out. I got kicked out of the denomination. The churches voted to go with me, but so we all left the denomination. But I knew when I was writing this book and making all those defenses that I was going to write this book. And I thought, if I don't get kicked out now, I'm sure going to get kicked out.
There's no hope for you yet.
Right. So that actually factored into my thinking of saying, I guess it's okay. Maybe we could just leave. Because the subtitle of the book is The Wisdom of Religion. And I really think I think that religion's role is to accumulate wisdom generation after generation after generation and transmit it so that each generation doesn't have to reinvent
with
the
an
wheel.
Experience. So let me ask you something. I want to know what it is.
Yeah.
Well, before I ask you this question, what is this new message? How are you sending? What's the message you're giving to kids?
I actually don't do it. My job was to write the book.
Okay. I hear you. Then
the
do
folks,
what I say, but I won't tell you.
Then the folks who took that book, and they're the ones working with the teenagers.
So what's your message in your book?
The message is sexuality is bigger than we've been taught. Because church moved into the realm of irrelevance, church created a vacuum around sex education. And into that vacuum came not governance, because governance doesn't seem to be an effective way to do sex education, not school boards, because they answer to divided communities, not even families, because we're stretched to the limit. The one that has stepped into the role has been business. And the primary educator we have around sexuality is business, because sex sells. And we are taking this vast swath that is human sexuality, that the Greeks had the wisdom to understand was so much bigger than eroticism, and we've reduced it to eroticism. And we've said that is sex. And so the message we want to give our kids is it's a bigger reality than just hooking up the plumbing. I've got a chapter in the book called 6 push-up bras and 6-pack abs, because marketers are trying to say, here's what beauty is, here's how it connecting looks like, here's what it looks like, and it all has to do with this erotic experience. And now here, buy our beer. And that's the primary voice out there doing training on sexuality. And religion has lost its voice, lost its moral standing, to be honest. There's no other voice. Families are just so stretched because of the economic requirements and what's happening.
Absolutely.
And so it isn't.
So who's good doing it? Right.
So who should be doing it is religion and families. But families are too stretched and they need help, and religion isn't giving any help. Religion is doubling down on, no sex until marriage. So the whole subtitle of the book is The Wisdom of Religion Without the Crazy. And before you can actually talk about religion's accumulated wisdom, you have to understand how crazy happened. Right. And that's back into history.
We
got to unpack history. So this is why, Christian person, you feel guilty around masturbation. This is why, Christian person, you feel awkward talking to your child about sex.
So let me ask you something. Is your desire from let's say kids reading this book or learning or understanding?
No. I don't write. That's why I'm not doing the thing. Okay. I'm not good at talking to teenagers.
But whoever's doing the talking.
I'm talking to the grown-ups who talk to the teenagers.
Okay. So the result being that the kids will rethink they're wanting to have sex because they have a different way, because it's not because of sin. What is the goal?
Yeah. So the first thing is to get sex out of the bucket of dirty.
That's what I.
So
that's what I want.
That's the first objective, is to say, hey, look, the desire for sex, the desire for the naked human form, the desire for intimate romance. The reason we go to those movies and the reason we look at those pictures, it's because that's how we survived on the Serengeti. The folks who didn't have that drive didn't have babies, so therefore they didn't produce. So we have this. It's a survival strategy. It's inside of it. It's not dirty. Right. But here's how it got dirty, and I've got a chapter, How Sex Got Dirty. Thanks a lot, Plato. It had to do with moving from the Hebrew worldview, in which, the Song of Solomon was an erotic poem about beauty and anticipation and desire, into the Greco-Roman worldview, in which we had this three-tiered universe, and anything that was material was bad. Well, sex was one of the casualties of that. The environmentalism was one of the casualties of that. The earth became throwawayable because it was debased. It was not good. Well, that's not Jesus. That's not Moses. That's not our spiritual heritage. That's Plato. And that's that worldview. And then a whole bunch of bishops who, by the way, never married a woman, so they didn't know anything about female sexuality. Right. They came and reinforced that notion and said, this equals Christian. And it doesn't. It's not. So first thing is to get sex out of the dirty. That's the crazy part. But then it's to understand, here's what religion has understood about healthy sexuality. And I've got a chapter in there on pacing. Here's sexual bonds that form in a healthy way kind of follow these patterns. And we are not doing that as a society. Once we threw out religion, we threw out baby and bathwash. And so we don't do that. It has to do with honoring both the masculine and the feminine. And so I use the image of yin and yang. And I say, here's what our society does. We honor the yin and we dishonor the yang.
Did you ever see the book Kosher Sex?
I did.
By Rabbi something or another, by Rabbi Schumer or something. It's an old book.
Yeah.
He talks about, why certain positions, why not certain positions. I mean, and it's almost funny, because it's the stuff that I'm hearing you say, that I know that he said, and that you hear wise men say, and women, is practical.
Yeah.
It's just plain practical. It's connecting the dots. It's getting away from somebody else saying that this is the way it was because of whatever stuff, but it's practical. It makes perfect sense.
Well,
doesn't this make sense?
In this whole process of rethinking religion, one of the fundamental building blocks of our ability to move forward was the idea that all truth is divine truth. So we Christians suffer this liability that we are in opposition to so many truths. We're in opposition to evolution because that will undercut our scriptures, or we're in opposition to psychology because that kind of diminishes spirituality, or we're in opposition to anthropology because they might find, and if we are in a quest for truth, then we don't have to be in competition with anyone.
How can you be? It's right here. It's all here.
So when we look at human sexuality from just the biological, neurological, societal, and cultural wisdom, sure enough, there are times when our religious tradition has been able to draw from that, to encapsulate that, and to transmit it to the next generation. There have been times when we've been crazy, like batshit kind of crazy, super crazy. But there are, I talk about this one guy, Clement of Alexandria. He had this notion that sex is dirty. Yeah, we got that. But lady sex is especially dirty because you got to be really careful of that female libido, because those ladies are going to come
Listen,
and tempt you and take you over.
I felt really bad last week when the news came out about that bishop.
I don't know about that.
Well, a bishop that, was condemning other bishops for having sex and all this kind of stuff. And they just found that, he's like in his 80s.
Yeah.
That makes me feel terrible.
Yeah.
That's just so wrong. Let me ask you something. And I don't know what time it is because I'm having so much fun. All right. What do you do to keep yourself going?
Well, remember when I drew those, here's a pithy little way that we describe our orthopraxis, how we do church. We draw a circle, we break it into 4 quadrants, and we say, here are the communal practices, the contemplative, the learning, and the serving practice. Rooted in our heritage, rooted in several heritages, not just ours. Now, how do we organize ourselves to both make the world a better place for people who don't even come to our church, and organize ourselves to make ourselves healthy by being steadfast in these practices?
Well, yeah, right. Because if you're rethinking religion, you cannot rethink it just with you.
Yeah.
It's got to be a bigger thing.
So then those 4 categories of practice, I do them. We've broken the
So you do
communal
them
practices down.
personally.
Yeah, and I do them within the community.
Okay.
I was just talking to a minister recently who was saying, actually, no, this is a kid who's thinking about ministry, who was saying, yeah, here's one of the primary reasons I don't want to become a minister, because the minister gets removed from the community to be the guru, the overseer of all. And we just don't do it that way. My communal life, my social life, my spiritual life happens within the context of this community. And we're far enough into this that people in our community don't mind calling me on my shit. And they don't mind, we've studied a lot of the way personalities work. We use this tool called the Enneagram. And one of the things that people understand, once you understand each other's personality, is where we're vulnerable.
Right.
So people know where I'm vulnerable, and they are both calling me on that and protecting me from that. So,
well, I listening is my thing.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a freaky listener, and I think this is all like stuff that comes to you that you really have to tap into. That you were tapping into years and years and years ago. But I say on my website, listen with me. I'm practicing too.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not, because otherwise, how can I do anything?
Yeah.
And I say, listen, I'm a tool. So if I'm not doing if I'm not tooling, if I'm not doing the work, if I'm not listening, or I'm not expanding what listening means, can mean, where it's going, what it's telling me, where it's taking me, or what's coming up, I can't even imagine. It's the same for you.
Yeah, when we draw the circle, one of the things that I say is the communal practices are not the most important. The contemplative is important, learning and serving. They're all important. But we do put the communal first, because there is a reality that if you do the communal in an authentic, genuine way, if we become authentic community, we can do the contemplative better. We can do the learning better. We can do the serving better. So we have this saying around the church, we find the divine better together than we do alone. And it is an iteration of that thing.
Absolutely.
Listen with me.
Listen with me.
Come, let's listen
yes,
together.
Because I'm going to hear something that I have to share with you. You're going to hear something you have to share with me that's going to do something to what I've just heard from you with what I heard yesterday, and it's going to take me somewhere else. I think it's a laboratory. I know. We're in a laboratory, and we have got to do this work together. Or not, because there's something here, or there, or over there. I don't know where it is, but there's something that we are developing. And I love what you said, that it's like in Judaism we have living Torah, right? This is a living organism that can only be transmitted through experiences.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, maybe the doctrines that we had and that took us to a place, and then of course it's shifted. You live in it. I mean, people have been, you know, transcribing it and looking at it and going with it and saying it works here, it doesn't work there, it worked for this. It's all part of it. I mean, it's got to be.
Mm.
And but I think where you are is a matter of just reality. I mean, this is there somebody calling? I hear a phone. Is there somebody? Okay, it's too late. What time are we? Oh my goodness. What time are we? 55. Okay.
55.
Okay. Anyway, I think that you're that there's something that you're getting ready to do yourself
Mm.
that's very important because you're so eloquent. You have a way of you're like on this you're in so many different places. You are one being in so many different places. I don't mean just in the church. I mean within these concepts that it's so important for you to be out there and for more people. For more people to hear this, right? Am I wrong?
Well,
Is that part
you
of
know,
it? Is other people
I've had
finding you?
blinders on for a long time trying to figure this stuff out. But, you know, now in this I've got 10 years left of kind of active leadership in the church. I
You
do
go in
think,
tens, don't you?
pardon?
You do travel in tens.
I do think out of ways. You got to be looking at the
Yeah.
cameras.
What? What am I
There.
looking at? Oh, I didn't see. What is it? Can you tell me what the question is? Can you read us?
Wildfire is asking, what do you think about
Tantra.
Tantra?
Yeah, yoga, right?
Here's what I know about it. It's very little. It's sounds like a very slow and kind of spiritual approach to sexuality and sexual experience.
Right.
Have any thoughts about it? I did think along the way when I first learned about it, hey, I should learn about that. That sounds fun.
Well, not too many people are talking about it. And I don't know how many people are doing it, but I think it's a very interesting. I mean, there's a lot. There's poses
Yeah.
that you do in couples.
So sex yoga.
Sex yoga,
All right, there
basically.
you go.
So that's a good question.
Yeah.
And we have a few more minutes, and maybe we can invite Doug to come back.
I'd love to come back.
I think you should. I would love you to come back
Mm.
because I'd love to have these more in-depth conversations with you.
Mhm.
But I really feel like you are you need to go out there and share. What's your next book?
I'm actually thinking instead of doing a book, doing a series of a collection of video animations because I'm talking to younger people and sometimes they don't read books all the way
No,
through.
they don't.
So, but that would be on a handbook of spiritual practice.
Animation.
Yeah. I learned how to do it on a computer. And so, in other words, to break these things down into 3 minutes and say, here is a handbook on spiritual practice that works in a in our Christian worldview, but it really works beyond our Christian worldview.
Right. Oh no, I think what you're talking about works beyond just. So let me. When you get an idea,
Mhm.
when you get these sparks of things, what do you experience personally? Like when you got the idea to do it that way, what did you experience?
That.
Okay. All right. You're fabulous, and I'm so glad
thank
that
you.
Chris invited you to come on, and I really
And thank you, Chris, for inviting me.
Yeah, Chris, you're out there. I know. I love lots of what you said. It makes me think, and I think that's really important for all of us is to think about rethinking.
Yeah.
You know, that's also important.
Yeah.
And the only way, well, that I know is to do it together.
Yeah.
Because you can't play tennis by yourself. You got to play just like listening. Listen with me. We got to listen. We got to do these things together. So it's really important. So you have my book anyway up there? Okay, here are my 2 books in just one afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Men. Lots of wonderful stories told by men about their emotional journey in all aspects of life. And then in just one afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Twins. Both books are on Amazon. The twins are really depict a way of having relationships, whether it's parenting, conflict resolution, sibling rivalry, loving each other till into their whatevers and still sleeping in the same bed. It's fabulous. And my next one up is In Just One Afternoon, Listening to Lost Millennials, and then it's addiction, divorcees. We just need to know about each other so we don't have to be in judgment.
Yeah.
Just be free and accept and forgive and love and all of that good stuff. Any final words?
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. We're going to have you back. And next time how long to your next book?
Well, again,
Or not
it'll
the book,
be
the handbook.
these collections, but I think
You're
I'll
sampling?
probably be able to start that by summer.
Cool. Great. So we're going to have you back before then, hopefully.
All right.
So anyway, we love you all so much. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. Bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.